So in today's video, I am going to discuss about how to prepare your child for entrance to a primary school. And essentially, I am going to talk about the age 0 to 3. And this video is primarily directed at young parents and to a large extent at the mothers of these kids, because they are likely to have the most impact from the age 0 to 1. And then from 1 to 3, it is both the mother and father who are going to have an impact on the child. So let's start with the age 0 to 1. So during this time, essentially the aim of the child is to grow in terms of body as well as some aspects of the mind, but the body takes precedence at this point. So I would say that focus on feeding during this time and develop motor skills, which are essentially how to use the muscles and how to use the skeletal system. So once this child has figured out how to crawl and then do some aspects of standing and maybe even walking towards the end of this phase, this child can be exposed to some basic words and pattern recognition problems. So for example, he or she should learn about how to figure out who is their mother and father, use the various words which are there for parents in the mother tongue, look at different creatures and try to classify them. For example, the child should classify the mammal species with respect to the bird species, with respect to fishes, and so on. So the child should have a capability of knowing that birds and cats are different, but cats and dogs are similar. So some of these aspects can be trained during this time. And this training is not necessarily verbal, but it's a question of supervised learning where you essentially show the child certain situations and you use certain words to reinforce these facts in the memory of the child. So this is how the neural network trains itself. So the exposure to the surroundings is very important at this time, and it's not a good idea to be at home all the time, but instead the child should be exposed to different children, to playing, to the world at large, to the different creatures, the birds, the bees, and so on. And also at this point, at the end of this 0 to 1 year phase, the child should figure out how to walk and use the toilet. Now we come to the next phase, which is the age 1 to 2. Now here the physical growth of the child continues, but the mental growth starts becoming more important. And this is the period when the child essentially starts learning basic vocabulary and grammar in the mother tongue. So throughout this phase from 0 to this point, beginning of ones, it's important to speak to the child largely in one language, because that is simplest in terms of picking up this language. So if you are bombarding the child with 2-3 languages at this time, there may be some consternation in the child's mind about these aspects. So it is best to focus on one language, which is typically the mother tongue. And the reason this is called the mother tongue is because the mother has a predilection towards speaking in this language. Now, essentially, children pick up the vocabulary and the grammar both from sentences which are spoken to the child. So it's very important to speak sentences which are proper, fully formed, and which use good vocabulary. So essentially, you start from basic vocabulary and quickly start improving the vocabulary at this point, so that the child picks up a reasonably large vocabulary to communicate in this mother tongue. Now, one of the ways to do this is to talk a lot with your friends in the presence of the child. And this is particularly important because people tend to gossip a lot, talk a lot, and sometimes people wonder why this is so. And this is largely because, especially with young women, this has been developed through the ages and the centuries so as to provide enough data to the child's brain to master the language. So essentially what people are doing when they are talking is they are providing data for the neural network of the child's mind. So you should talk as much as possible in colloquial language, in fast language, in slow language, and so on, so that the child picks up the complete nuances of the mother tongue. Now use one language because this neural network, which is the child's mind, needs data, and you want to give one language at this time. Now, once the child has reached about 1.5 years of age, you can start exposing this child to a second language, and the child will then figure out that there is another language being spoken, and this language could be the language which is being used to prepare the child for primary school. Now, if there is a special situation that there are two parents and these two parents speak two different languages which are both very useful, then these two parents can actually speak to the child in two different languages. And this will make the child realize that there are these two mediums of communication, and then the child will pick up not only a mother tongue but a father tongue. But this is only in the case where both these people are capable of speaking these languages at a fairly high level of proficiency. Now, if your proficiency in a language is not good, it is better not to speak to the child in that language, because you are likely to mess up his neural networks, and then whatever damage is done in terms of mispronunciations and wrong grammar will linger in the child's mind for the rest of his life. Now, once the language aspect has been mastered to some extent, the child can focus on counting some basic numbers such as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so he should understand the concept of zero or nothingness, can look at various paintings, sculptures, try to paint pictures in picture books and so on to figure out these aspects about how certain things which are out there can be transferred into a more abstract medium. Travel as much as possible. It can be either by walking or in car or in buses or different vehicles. So children take very well to different vehicles and are quickly able to comprehend a large amount of information during these times, because essentially you are subjecting them to dynamic data, and dynamic data in contrast to static data is much better in terms of training any kind of system. Now, at this point, you may also introduce the child to a smartphone, a tablet, or apps. So this is a very good time to figure out some of these things. Now, from age 2 to 3 is the point when it's a good idea to put the child in a preschool, because this is when the child will learn how to interact with his or her colleagues and also get some basic concept about how to function in a controlled social system where there is a leadership in the form of a teacher who is trying to control them. So this is where the particular aspect of the child being only in the presence of a very nice environment of his mother starts to break down, and he realizes that he has to live in a world where there are more draconian setups, and so this school teacher is the first such person to come into this person's life. Now, at this point, the child can be exposed to mother tongue and a different language and improve the vocabulary as much as possible. So again, remember that to train the brain, you need data, data, and data. And so as much data as can be given to the brain, the better it is. And so between periods of sleep and food, the child should be subjected to as much data as possible so that the brain grows. Now, this is a point where the child can start thinking of some abstract concepts, such as concepts of line, curve, shapes, maps, people, religion, cars, planes, ships, simple graphs, and so on, which he can figure out. So, for example, the child may realize what is a cone, what is a pyramid, what is a rectangle, what is a square, and some of these basic shapes. At this point, the child can also start playing some simple computer games such as Tetris to develop his visual spatial skills. Also, you can look at games such as Ludo, Carom, basic card games, which can teach the child about aspects of probability. And to some extent, if a child is precocious, he can also look at chess, which can give some insights into strategy. Now, just before the age of 3 is a good time to figure out what is a web page and look at some of the aspects of the basic HTML code behind the web page, so that you can see the connection between the HTML code and the web pages, and also the child can learn how to browse web pages, which will help him a lot. Now, some basic mathematics like how to add and subtract can be discussed at this stage, and certain games can be taught. So games are very useful in terms of making the child understand that there are rules and these rules need to be followed. So this is a particular sociological and psychological concept which is useful for the child. So some of the games include playing with ball. So it could be basketball, volleyball, or it could be games such as cricket, football, and so on. So all these games are going to help the child to further cement his capability, as well as learn how to do teamwork and how to accept winning and losing, which are very important aspects of a child's life. Now, at the age of 3, the child is ready to get into a proper school, and therefore he will be subjected to certain basic tests, and he may be asked some basic questions in the native tongue, in some other language, and so on. So at this point, if you have gone through these particular things which I have mentioned before, the child will be very well prepared, he will be precocious, and therefore he will have a very simple time in getting into this university or school system. So I hope you benefit from this video, and in further videos I will discuss more about how to train a child from age 3 further on all the way to high school, and then get him ready for college. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for listening to me.